What's up guys, it's Seki, your pal behind the screen, back again to tell you another story from RPG Horror Stories. But before we hop into it, I must give a slight trigger warning because this story does contain mild child abuse. So here's your trigger warning. If that bothers you, feel free to skip this one, no hard feelings. But for everyone who stayed, let's hop into the story. This story is written by user Consequence Antique 97 and is titled Satanic Panic in the 90s. This is a throwaway account because I want to get this off of my chest. It stuck with me for decades, even though at the time it was just another instance of this kind of behavior from adults in my life. This is a long one. I feel it needs some context. The too long didn't read is the Mormon adults in the 90s were the real monsters. I was raised Mormon. Many of you may be familiar with the religion from personal experience or popular culture. Whatever you've heard is probably too generous. I'm sorry if you're in Mormon and you're still clutching your CTR ring tightly to your chest as you read this. But the Mormon church, just like the Catholic church, is heavily hierarchical and misogynistic, which leads to the same kind of abuses as have been well documented in the Catholic church. I hope someday you can break free of it. Mormonism is extremely conservative. Some might say reactionary. They drag their feet on ending polygamy and including black men in the priesthood. So it's no surprise that Mormons were swept up in the satanic panic hysteria of the 80s and 90s. I was a kid during this time, barely coming into my mid-teens as the fires of the panic were still smoldering away in the Midwest. Without the internet being what it is today, I really didn't have a conception on what it was happening. To me, Satan was real and scary, and one wrong step could potentially get me possessed by a demon. But my older brother was aware to the extent he could be and was above it, listening to metal music that drove my parents insane, playing Magic, and running a D&D campaign for him and his friends, even letting me join once. I love Magic the Gathering and D&D, and my brother. My imagination has always been extremely active, and I relied on it heavily to escape a lot of bad situations I found myself in growing up. If I pretend to be a cat, people yelling and hitting me don't matter. I'm a cat. I go climb a tree and get stuck all day until they decide to climb back down. After you turn 8 in the Mormon religion, two things important happen. 1, you are baptized and your childhood sins are washed away. 2, you join the Cub Scouts. At 11/12ish, you swap to the Boy Scouts and also get the first layer of priesthood magic bestowed upon you by a ring of business ghouls. Once you're in the Boy Scouts, you spend at least 5 days of your week occupied by the church. On Sunday is 3 hours of church, along with any potlucks or whatever happened afterwards. Monday is family home evening, where your family has to gather after dinner and one of your parents puts on some kind of churchy thing. For us, it was reading scripture for a long time until my dad got bored and started having us read Dickens novels out loud. Must have been through A Christmas Carol a dozen times. Tuesday or Wednesday, you have to have a youth activity, usually at the church building itself. This can be charity work or something ridiculous or terrible. Another day of the week, your home teachers come over. These are just adult men in the church who are assigned to do a religious lesson in your house. Don't worry, your dad is also affecting someone else's house weekly too, so it's all square. Everyone suffers equally. And on other days, usually weekend days, you do Boy Scouts. It's easy to see why I was so indoctrinated, why Satan felt so real to me. It was every day of my life. It's also easy to see why I was used to the presence and hostility of adult men who were not related to me. Every summer we were compelled to raise money for and then attend scout camp. 2 weeks of camping and working no merit badges at the scout sponsored or owned campground. I think KOA owns most of them now and they are terrible. I actually loved this. I hated being away from my Nintendo, but damn, it was great to be out of my overcrowded house. 5 siblings, Mormons, and experience a measure of quiet and freedom. The only drawback is the scoutmaster and chaperones are there and they are Mormon, so they have to fake that niceness that barely veils a quiet rage that will explode at any moment. The summer in question, I decided to bring a few decks of Magic the Gathering cards. My brother would let me borrow his D&D book and a few of his dice I could swipe. A few of the other boys and I got together in one of the larger tents, and I taught them how to play Magic, and we had a great time. There was laughter, competitiveness, and as great as time as you can have. We did this for a couple of nights, and the decks I brought was starting to show their imbalances, because I was a kid and games hadn't been as thoroughly mathed and engineered as they are now, nor would I have fully grasped them if they had been. Finally, I was ready to try to DM a D&D game. So one evening, the Scoutmasters were off fishing or whatever they were doing. I wasn't keeping track of them because this wasn't doing anything bad in my mind. We get together in the tent and I explain the game. How it's like a video game, but you could do anything you want. And I'll just tell you how it works and we'll use dice to decide how it goes. Everyone's excited. Everyone makes characters. It was a good vibe and everyone was ready to go and roll with character sheets, scrawled into tiny notebook paper I had brought to keep track of Magic the Gathering HP. I didn't have anything planned other than, you start in a tavern. Maybe there's goblins outside. But it didn't matter, because as we were getting going, we heard a shout from outside the tent. What's going on here? It was one of the adult chaperones. Not the official scoutmaster, but in the Mormon troops, it hardly matters. Every adult man has authority over children. Everyone was quiet for a moment. We knew someone was in trouble, but I managed to convince myself probably someone forgot to put away food and a raccoon got into the campsite again. I called back from the tent. We're just playing Dungeons and Dragons in here. Is everything okay out there? I smiled to everyone else in an attempt to be cool. The inhuman voice crescendos as the heavy footsteps of a large adult man stormed the tent of barely teenage boys. You're doing what? What are you doing? Get out of here! I am yanked from the tent by my elbow and released mid-yank so that I fall to the ground. The dirt hits me hard and I have to struggle to catch my breath. I still don't understand, but I was getting used to not understanding why I was getting hurt. I get to my feet and say, we were just playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's a game where I know what Dungeons and Dragons is. It's evil. It's witchcraft. It's satanic. He's practically screaming at me as he gesticulates wildly. His premature gray hair with the standard Mormon haircut parted to one side evenly, fully shaven face becoming devilish, unkempt as the kind veneer crumbles. I said, no it isn't. It's just pretend, like Lord of the Rings or Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering? Those tarot voodoo cards? Those are satanic too. I can't remember everything he said. He yanked me a few more times, shoved me back a few times, and when he saw his son was in there, he lost it even more. He confiscated all my paper and the D&D book, the dice, and all the Magic the Gathering cards, yelling at me the whole time, laying his hands on me whenever he saw me trying to mentally get away. None of the other kids spoke up. A couple of them ran away to be anywhere else during this. I don't blame them. We were kids. At the end of it, he grabbed me tightly by the forearm and twisted my arm to pull me in close and whispered, if you ever attempt to corrupt my son again, I'll cut your liver out. I was a child. I was no more than 13. I went to my one-person tent I was borrowing from the church because my parents couldn't afford one and cried. I cried quietly to myself all night. I still didn't understand. I remember how scared and ashamed I was. I still had another week or so of camp with this beast sleeping one tent over. I wanted to roleplay heroes winning and villains being defeated, but in my own life, the villains had always won and I never did anything. The next day, I tried to tell the scoutmaster what happened. He was somewhat receptive. There was a glimmer of hope, but the adult chaperone hand waved it away and just explained to me that Dungeons and Dragons was evil and set me straight. The scoutmaster agreed and nothing more was said. Violence towards teenage boys from adult father figures was still pretty accepted back then, especially if it was determined that the boy was troubled or unruly or straying from the path. Violence was how you got them back on, and in the Mormon church this was doubly so, and if it didn't leave a mark, it wasn't really abuse. When I got home, I told my brother I traded his cards and book away from some snacks and soda. He was pissed and deleted my favorite game off the family computer and punched me in the gut. I was too confused and ashamed to tell him the truth, and honestly I didn't trust him to help me as I believed I had done something wrong, something satanic. I should have. I don't know what he would have done. Probably nothing. I learned later that from this moment on, I was on a blacklist of untrustworthy teens that needed to be restrained and watched. I left the church in my 20s when I was finally able to recontextualize what I experienced as not normal, as abuse, and not just the reasonable actions of adults trying to keep a troubled teen on the straight and narrow. I didn't play D&D again for decades. I still have troubles with getting fully into it, and my experiences in my house growing up and in the church have ostracized me from men. I have very few male friends, and the most men I encounter I am immediately on edge with. I have sons of my own, and I am doing everything in my power to protect them and nurture them and give them whatever they need to be whatever they want to be. Thanks again for letting me get this off my chest. I hope it hasn't been too big of a bummer. So unfortunate that, people in religious organizations still demonize people's hobbies and aspects of people's personalities to their detriment, and usually these attacks occur when they're kids. So big props to OP for persevering that, and it's so unfortunate that he wasn't able to get help, or he felt like he was so alone, but I feel like his children have a really good dad, and I know he'll be the positive influence that he wished he had for his sons. I wish him all the best, and I know he's gonna do great. And to you, dear viewer, don't let someone stifle your creativity or stop you from being you. you. You rule. I think you're swag. I think you're great. But with that being said, this is all we have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Seki Behind the Screen, and I can't wait to see you guys later. Bye.